This video was brought to you by NordVPN. In the next couple of months, Turkey is due to go to the polls to elect a new parliament and president. Now, incumbent President Erdogan has been in power for the best part of 2 decades, and while he might not go down too well in the West, his Islamist-tinged populism has proved genuinely popular in Turkey. However, over the last few months or so, Erdogan's appeal has begun to wane, and polling suggests that he's now behind the main opposition candidate. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at the 3 reasons why Erdogan might lose the next election: the economy, the newly unified opposition, and his lackluster response to the earthquake. Now, before we get into it, a couple of caveats. Firstly, these 3 reasons aren't intended as an exhaustive list, but please let us know in the comments if you think there's anything obvious that we have missed. Secondly, because we try and be a neutral and balanced channel, we're going to release a video on the 3 reasons that Erdogan might win the election later this month. So subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when that video comes out. Anyway, with that said, let's get into the 3 reasons why Erdogan might lose, starting with Erdogan's handling of the economy. Now, we've done loads of videos on Turkey's economy in the past, so go and watch them if you want to know more. But essentially, because Turkey's economy relies quite heavily on imports, Turkey's inflation rate has surged over the last 18 months or so. Now, usually, central banks hike inflation rates in order to reduce inflation. But Erdogan thinks that this idea is a conspiracy advanced by the so-called interest rate lobby. So instead, he decided to cut rates and fire any central banker who dared to disagree with him on this policy. Accordingly, the central bank has cut rates from 19% in March of 2021 to 10.5% today. And as orthodox economists would have predicted, year-on-year inflation has jumped from 20% to over 80% by the end of last year. Now, while that might sound bad, unofficial estimates suggest that things are even worse. An unofficial index that measures inflation in Istanbul, compiled by the city's Chamber of Commerce, put the inflation rate at 107%, while another unofficial index, developed by the Independent Inflation Research Group, put it at 185%. Now, while year-on-year inflation fell to 5.5% in February, and Turkey's GDP has apparently held up relatively well, inflation has still eaten away at ordinary Turks' living standards. That's because despite the fact that the Turkish economy grew by 5.6% in 2022, this growth was driven by strong exports, enabled by a weak currency, and a desperate consumption binge by Turkish households, who realized that they needed to spend their lira before it became valueless. So while growth does look good, the reasons underlying it aren't all that positive. On top of that, despite successive minimum wage increases, wages are still way behind inflation. And as such, the vast majority of Turks have seen steep declines in their living standards. However, the economy isn't Erdogan's only issue, and the second reason he might lose the next election is Turkey's newly unified opposition. Essentially, the opposition parties realized a while ago that the only way that they were going to defeat Erdogan was if they formed a coalition. Which is why, in December last year, the 6 main opposition parties, known as the Table of 6, announced that they'd be running together on a package of constitutional reforms that would primarily aim to return the country to a parliamentary democracy. For context, Erdogan himself created the current executive presidential system, which gives sweeping constitutional powers to the president, with him doing so via a controversial referendum in 2017. Fortunately for Erdogan, however, the Table of 6's unity was immediately strained by their inability to decide on a leader. According to polling, the 2 most popular candidates were Mansur Yavaş and Ekrem İmamoğlu, the opposition mayors of Ankara and Istanbul respectively. However, despite their popularity, the leader of the main opposition party, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, apparently refused to give up the reins, despite the fact that he's significantly less popular than either of the other 2 candidates, and the fact that he's lost to Erdogan multiple times in the past. And just last week, this issue looked so major that the alliance looked at risk of collapsing altogether, with the leader of Turkey's right-wing Good Party saying that she'd leave the alliance largely because she didn't think that Kılıçdaroğlu was fit to lead it. However, on Monday, the alliance finally announced that they decided on an official new hierarchy. Kılıçdaroğlu would be their official presidential candidate, while Yavaş and İmamoğlu would be vice presidents were they to win. Now, this decision is yet more bad news for Erdogan, both because a united opposition is obviously more effective than a divided one, but also because polling suggests that, while he might not be as popular as some of the other candidates, Kılıçdaroğlu has already opened up a healthy 15-point lead over Erdogan. But there's another reason that Erdogan's in trouble. The third reason is Erdogan's lackluster response to the recent earthquake. Now, you likely already know this, but the earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria last month, especially the 7.8 magnitude one, have been truly catastrophic. Over 50,000 people have died as a result of the quakes, of which 40,000 were Turkish, making it the fifth deadliest earthquake in the 21st century. On top of that, though, 1.25 million people have also been made homeless as a result, and the UN estimates that the damage will exceed $100 billion in cost, over 10% of Turkey's GDP. Now, obviously, a natural disaster isn't necessarily bad news for an incumbent government. After all, it's not like it was Erdogan's fault. However, his response and some of his policies that preceded the earthquake have been criticized. For instance, Turkey's search and rescue teams were slow to arrive at the disaster and struggled to make a dent in the enormous amount of damage. But Erdogan originally refused to accept any criticism for the state's response. After an intense backlash, he did eventually apologize, admitting that we were not able to work in the way we wanted to in the first few days, and for this I apologize. But by this point, it was too little too late. Erdogan's government has also been criticized for misspending the natural disaster tax revenues, worth about $3.5 billion, and failing to effectively enforce safety regulations brought into force after the 1999 earthquake. That's because in order to stimulate construction and economic growth in Turkey, Erdogan repeatedly issued amnesties on these regulations, and some of the buildings that collapsed during the most recent quakes were built under those amnesties. As such, there's a deep historical irony here. The Turkish state's lackluster response to the 1999 earthquake and the massive inflation that followed helped to propel Erdogan's AKP party to power in 2003, when Erdogan promised to improve government efficiency and prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Today, Erdogan finds himself on the opposite side of a very similar situation, and this time his mishandling of the earthquake has undermined the implicit deal that he made with the Turkish people back in 2003. That while he might be a bit autocratic, he's more effective than the dithering Democrats of the West. So, those are the three reasons that Erdogan might lose the next election. And to be clear, we're not saying that he will or that we want him to. And as we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be doing another video on the 3 reasons he might actually win. So subscribe if you want to see that. Nonetheless, as this video has hopefully made clear, things are looking tough for Erdogan. And there's a real chance that we could see a change in government in Turkey this year. A couple of years ago, I was a victim of identity theft, and I only found out when a letter from the court came through my door saying that I owed a bunch of money to a broadband company for an address I'd never even lived at. After a bunch of legal back and forth, I was forced to pay the money that I allegedly owed just to try and make the problem go away. But from then on, I was determined to make sure that I wasn't caught out again. And as such, I took a number of steps, including signing up for NordVPN. Now, you surely already know that NordVPN is the world's fastest virtual private network. But you might not know that they have a whole suite of threat protection features too. In fact, NordVPN's threat protection shields you from all kinds of dangerous things online, blocking malware, trackers, and malicious ads to help prevent you from falling victim to any of these scams or phishing attacks. Not only that, they also have a dark web monitoring service. So even if your data were to fall into the wrong hands, they'd scour the dark web to notify you when someone shares, leaks, or sells your details. Hopefully meaning that you'd find out what was going on before a court order lands on your doorstep. Now, ultimately, this isn't a fun thing to think about, but trust me, it's a whole lot less fun when it becomes a reality. Also, it's not just other people that this happens to. I hope you'll agree that I'm a reasonably smart person, and I did a computer science degree, and I still got. So, click the link in the description or go to nordvpn.com/TLDR to get a huge discount on their 2-year plan. And with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose. So, thanks for your support, and make sure you click the link in the description.